would it be without the...
Outside a Baptist church in Tampa, Florida, a couple dozen men, women, and their families from around the United States have gathered to share conversation over hot dogs and hamburgers. They are united by one very horrible common thread. Convicted of murder, they had been sentenced to die. Among them, Nate Fields from Chicago and Sabrina Smith from Mississippi. Nate was a victim of judicial misconduct. Sabrina, a victim of poor representation.
When I got on death row, a guy told me, "Nate, you in the newspaper." I told him, "Nobody's talking about me anymore." He said, "I figured that." So he sent me an article. In the article, it said that my judge, who had sentenced me to death and put me on death row, he was indicted for taking bribes in capital murder cases, including my own.
I had an overzealous prosecutor who wanted to make a name for himself, and he chose me to do that.
How did you end up exonerated?
I ended up with 2 sets of attorneys in the second trial who brought forth all the information that should have been done in the first trial.
Today, they are free. Their death sentences never carried out. They are among the nearly 160 people in the United States who were wrongfully convicted, who have now been exonerated, cleared of the crimes. Some spent decades on death row. Now, as part of an organization called Witness to Innocence, they share their stories and speak out against capital punishment.
There's no justice in the death penalty here in Florida, period. No justice.
The group has met in Florida in part because there are nearly 400 people on death row here. Only California has more, and no other state has exonerated more individuals than the 24 in Florida, which means opponents of the death penalty say the state got it wrong way too often. And they argue Florida is an example of how race, money, and politics play a part in who is sentenced to die. Nearly 45% are minorities, Black and to a lesser degree Hispanics. Jeff Weiner is a criminal defense attorney.
Any judge, any prosecutor, any lawyer who tells you that race is not a factor is either ignorant or not being candid. It's that simple. There's no disputing that black defendants have a much rougher time in first-degree murder cases when the death penalty is being sought. It's a non-issue, it's fact.
So the death penalty in the state of Florida seems to come off discriminatory, that African Americans and Hispanics seem to disproportionately get the death penalty more so than people like you and me.
And that's a defect in the way the death penalty works, because most of the time minorities, people who are charged with these kind of crimes, cannot afford to hire the top attorneys. And so these people are the ones that are unfortunately much more likely to get the death penalty. And it's a scary thing, because many times we now know these people are innocent. And it's only because of DNA and new scientific technology that we even know that, or they would be dead.
Meet Juan Melendez. Juan speaks at schools, churches, before state legislatures. He speaks to anyone who will listen. His message: capital punishment is evil. His personal story was made into a documentary.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the same week, they sent me to death.
He is one of the exonerated who came to Tampa. Melendez's case, death penalty opponents say, epitomizes all that is wrong with the system. Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is where Juan Melendez now calls home. But for nearly 18 years, his home was a 6 by 9 foot prison cell on Florida's death row. Melendez was convicted of killing a cosmetology school owner in 1983. The man had been shot 3 times and his throat slashed.
They have what they call a police informant, what they call in the streets a snitch. He claimed that I confessed the crime to him. I had 5 witnesses corroborating the alibi testimony. I had other witnesses testifying saying that the police informant, the snitch, had a gun against me. But I had a problem. This is when the racists come in. All the witnesses that I had on my side was from the African American race. But when a black man and a black woman testified for the defense on my side, all of a sudden, the credibility is gone.
The jury was picked in 2 days, testimony heard in one, a guilty verdict on the 4th day, and a death sentence the next day. What happened? Why was it so easy for prosecutors to convict you?
Well, first of all, I had to say because I'm a Puerto Rican. I will tell you that. Race is always an issue in the death penalty. Also, the victim is white. That's another race aspect of the case. It was easy also because I don't have resources. Look at me, I'm not O.J. Simpson. I don't have money to hire good lawyers to defend me.
16 years after he was sentenced to die, after 3 failed appeals before the Florida Supreme Court, a twist of fate saved him. A taped confession from the real killer was discovered. Did the truth play any role in your case at all?
No. I beginning to, when all this happened to me, I came to one conclusion. It's not about justice. It's all about winning. The truth don't matter.
If you had been white, would you have been convicted?
I don't think so.
In the documentary, Andrea Colon, Juan's mother, says she never let on to friends that her son might die. She just prayed every day.
Pero nadie en el barrio lo sabía porque yo no se lo conté a nadie, solamente a Dios y a la Virgen Santísima. Y ahí se pegué yo a pedir a Santísima, así tuve todos esos años.
On a January night in 2002, Juan Melendez was released. He returned home to Puerto Rico to see his mother.
Luego de varias horas de espera, el gran momento llegó. Madre e hijo se confundieron en un abrazo.
So how much did the state of Florida give you in compensation for the 17 years and 8 months and a couple of days that you spent in?
Well, it was, to be precise, it was 17 years, 8 months, and 1 day, but who's counting? But anyway, they gave me $100.
$100?
Yeah, a pair of pants and a t-shirt. And they never apologize.
You know what gets me? In most of these cases, instead of the prosecutor saying, I am so sorry, we want to make this up to you. We want to help you in the legislature to get money, even though that can never repay the time you wrongfully spent on death row. Instead, we have prosecutors all the time saying, well, I still think he's guilty. I mean, how despicable is that?
But things are changing in Florida, although not by the state's own choice. Recently, the United States Supreme Court and the state Supreme Court ruled Florida's capital punishment law unconstitutional. It allowed for a death sentence, even if not all the jurors agreed, and a judge had the power to overrule a jury's decision.
The judge should never have been able to override the jury. Never. The judge doesn't know more. The judge knows just what the jurors know. We have a system of juries in this state and in this country, and the judge is a mediator, an arbitrator, a ruler on issues of evidence, not an omnipotent person who decides the penalties in a death case.
There are many on the other side of the issue as well who believe the death penalty law didn't need to be fixed.
I was extremely comfortable with it, as I think most every citizen was.
Sheriff Wayne Ivey has been in law enforcement for nearly 38 years. A staunch supporter of capital punishment, Ivey believes there are people who deserve to pay with their lives. He points to the case of one of his own deputies, shot and killed 5 years ago.
Absolutely people that deserve to die. Brandon Bradley, for example, that killed Deputy Barbara Pill right here in our own community. He absolutely deserves to die. He robbed our agency, her family. He robbed her of the rest of her life, and it was ridiculous. He didn't have to. He had been to jail before. He could have gone to jail again, but he made that evil decision to take Barbara's life. And I have no problem in making the right and just decision to take his life in turn.
Because a jury verdict must now be unanimous and should have been right along, Brandon Bradley will get a new sentencing hearing. If the new jury does not vote unanimously for death, Bradley's sentence would be changed to life without parole. Many others facing death could get new sentencing hearings as well. One of them is 78, the oldest man on death row. This is Bartow, a town in central Florida about halfway between Orlando and Tampa. In December of 1997, it was the scene of a brutal mass murder. Police ultimately settled on a man named Nelson Serrano, and you would not believe the lengths they went to get him. Serrano, originally from Ecuador, was a family man and a businessman. He and his partners owned a garment company in Bartow. But there was a bitter falling out, and Nelson resigned. He claimed $1 million had disappeared from company accounts. In December of 1997, the bodies of one of the owners and 3 other family members, including an assistant district attorney, were found inside the building. Immediately, Serrano was a suspect. Marcia Silvers is Serrano's appellate attorney. Did the police, the prosecutors, ever look at anyone else? Did
They never looked for another perpetrator at all. From the day one, they focused on Nelson Serrano, and they did everything they possibly could to create a circumstantial case, and sometimes out of nothing.
But for years, police had nothing. Nelson Serrano moved back to Ecuador. Then in 2001, at Orlando International Airport, an investigator finds 2 parking stubs with Serrano's fingerprints. He's indicted for murder. But authorities can't get him out of Ecuador, so arrangements are made to grab him off the street. Francisco Serrano is Nelson's son.
This ex-colonel told us this in a deposition in Ecuador, that he called his buddies from the DEA, Ecuadorian DEA, 6 of them, and said, I want you guys to suit up and help me capture this guy. They got a van. These guys came with machine guns. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. My dad's walking out of lunch with my mother and 4 other friends, and they grab him, machine guns pointing at him, put him up, make sure he didn't have any weapons on him, and throw him into a van, and don't tell him why, don't tell him anything. They take him straight to the airport, and they stick him in a dog kennel. He spent the night in a cage with other dogs for the night. 7 o'clock in the morning, they bring him out, he's been beat up, and they take him onto the American Airlines plane.
In your estimation, were human rights laws, international laws broken by what happened to Nelson Serrano?
And it's not just in my estimation that these laws were violated, but the International Commission on Human Rights has conducted an investigation of this and made findings, and they have found beyond a reasonable doubt that his civil rights, his constitutional rights were violated in the manner in which he was kidnapped.
During the trial, prosecutors said Serrano flew to Orlando from Atlanta, where he'd been, picked up a rental car, drives to Bartow, commits the murders, drives to Tampa, and catches a flight back to Atlanta. There's no physical evidence Serrano was at the crime scene, and another man had been seen across the street around the time of the murders.
I think he got convicted mainly because you had prosecutors in this case who did not seek justice. They sought to win at all costs, and because of that, they suppressed from the jury facts that the jury should have known.
Was your father a victim, at least to some degree, of racism in the judicial system?
There's my father, this accent, Latino. They labeled him the Mexican, and, not in a good way. And there was this undercurrent of racism in there, that when they saw this, Latino looking to be convicted, they were like, yeah, he had to have done it then.
In 2005, Nelson Serrano was sentenced to death by a jury vote of 9-3, not unanimous. At the very least, his sentence might be changed to life without parole. But knowing that your father's not gonna die at the hands of an executioner has got to be at least some solace, no?
You think, okay, at least he's not gonna die by somebody putting in a needle into him, right? So what happens when they put the needle into you? You're dead in about 5 minutes? Instead, Instead, they're going to kill him little by little. So what would you rather have? A 5-minute death or a 10-year death? It's a personal question.
Are you worried that Nelson Serrano may end up dying and never see the light of day?
I think that's a very real possibility.
For Juan Melendez, the time he spent awaiting death changed him, took its toll, and that past is never far from his mind. His longtime companion, Judy Caruso, says even after 15 years of freedom, that past always creeps in.
When he is sleeping at night, he has nightmares frequently, still to this day. And I mean, even things like when we go out to dinner and he's looking at the menu, he'll hand the menu to me and say, "Can you pick me something to eat?" And that's because he was so institutionalized, right? He had all his choices taken away from him.
When he was finally released, all Juan Melendez wanted to see were the things the rest of us take for granted every day. It had, after all, been 17 years, 8 months, and 1 day.
I want to see the moon, and it came naturally. I didn't have to think about it. I want to see the stars. I want to walk on grass, on dirt, because all them years I was walking on concrete. I want to hold a little baby mom and play with him.
In New Mexico, Juan spends time walking with his dog Oso. It's peaceful here.
Over here, also. Over here.
And finding peace is, quite simply, not an easy thing to do.